Fred, I caught the tail end of that vaccine conversation, and I think you might be overlooking something important.
Oh, hi, Chuck Sr. So what is it that you think I'm overlooking?
Herd immunity. In order to get the benefits of herd immunity, around 90% of the population needs to be vaccinated.
There's some debate about that concept, and the specific numbers involved. But even if we grant that herd immunity works as claimed, that doesn't magically change the principles of freedom and self-determination.
Why not? If everyone who can gets vaccinated, it protects the weakest and sickest who cannot get vaccinated.
But you are promoting protecting some people's lives at the expense of other people's freedom.
It's not really forcing them. They still have the option not to. They just won't be able to be employed anywhere. We have been requiring vaccinations in order to attend public schools for years.
Technically that is true, but in that case, the alternatives you are leaving them are expensive. And they are being coerced into funding public schools and then barred from using them.
But there are lots of parents who don't want their kids going to school with unvaccinated children. How do you propose we handle that instead?
What about the reverse? Is there any reason those parents who don't want their children exposed to unvaccinated kids shouldn't be expected to homeschool their children instead?
Well, why is that any better? It is still just favoring one side over the other and forcing one group to homeschool at their own expense.
Yes, but the groups aren't equal.
Of course not. One group's views are based on scientific consensus, and the others are ignorant and backwards.
Maybe so, but this isn't a scientific question. One group is only looking for the freedom to control their own children's health decisions and letting others do as they wish with their own children. The other group is selfishly demanding control over other people's decisions. Which position is the greater affront to the principles of individual freedom?
We're just showing the group you favor in a better light. Are you siding with the anti-vaxxers?
Yes, I am, but not because I oppose vaccinations, but because I favor freedom. Imagine the situation was reversed, and that the anti-vaxxers were trying to ban vaccinated children from public schools.
Isn't that what you just proposed a minute ago, with pro-vaccinators homeschooling their kids?
Not at all. I proposed allowing them to do so if they don't want their kids exposed to unvaccinated kids. That is not the same as requiring them to do so, which is an important distinction. One involves freedom, and the other does not, which is why I am opposed to the current rules. But I would oppose the anti-vaxxers if they tried to limit other people's freedom to vaccinate or not.
So if we don't want the government to intervene, what could be done about the current pandemic and other preventable diseases?
The decision of whether or not to vaccinate has its own natural consequences, and if large numbers of people were dying from a disease that had a vaccine available, more people would freely want to get that vaccine, without government intervention or coercion. And if they aren't choosing to, that's a sign of lacking trust in authority. And attempts to continue overextending that authority, further infringing on people's freedom, won't fix the problem.
But what about the other people that are affected by the decision not to vaccinate? The herd immunity dynamic.
I can think of a few options that don't violate individual freedom. While I don't like the idea of government paying for things, if we as a society determine that vaccines are of value for the public health, one thing we can do is subsidize the cost to remove the financial burden, as has been done with the COVID vaccine.
Why wasn't that approach pursued before COVID?
Probably because it is more profitable to overcharge insurance companies for a treatment that is mandated by the state, so they can't reasonably refuse to cover it for their customers. And even overpriced, vaccines probably lower overall healthcare expenses, so insurance companies don't complain too much.
Well, if vaccines lower overall health costs, what if health insurance companies required their customers to be vaccinated?
I would be okay with that as long as health insurance wasn't legally required, and the government wasn't pushing companies to require it.
So you are okay with insurance requiring it as long as the government wasn't involved. So why so opposed to government involvement?
That adds imbalances to the market and removes choice. Imagine that most all insurance companies required vaccinations.
People would be pretty much forced to do it if they wanted insurance.
But that would create a market for plans that didn't require vaccinations, even if it was at a higher cost. The market naturally takes care of that, as long as government isn't unfairly tipping the scales.
So you would be okay with private schools requiring their students to be vaccinated?
Yes, of course. Private schools should have the freedom to set reasonable requirements for attendance.
But for some reason, public schools should not be able to set reasonable requirements for attendance?
Yes, because I am not required to pay for private schools, but I am required to pay for public schools. So they shouldn't be discriminating based on religious preferences about medical care. In a free society, people and private entities should be limited by the government as little as possible, while government entities should be required not to discriminate against citizens in an effort to control them or their choices.